Well, it's a pleasure to be with all of you here this morning at this very important meeting. I want to thank again my colleagues from Mexico and Canada and my colleagues from the United States who have worked so hard over the last several months, not only putting this meeting together, but also doing all of the work that you're going to see presented here today, for which we're very interested in getting feedback from all of you. I also want to thank the stakeholders for coming, those of you from industry, from the NGO community, as well as those of you from academia. I like to say that participatory government is a really important value, one that we, in all three of our countries, put a high priority on. But I understand how hard it is to participate sometimes. It involves a lot of personal time, a lot of personal commitment, and a lot of resources to be able to meaningfully participate. So we really value the energy that the stakeholders are bringing, coming long distances in many cases, but the time and the effort that you're bringing to give us feedback as we try to do our job, which is to ensure that chemicals in North America are safe. Just to briefly review what the priorities are for the sound management of chemicals. Several years ago, the three ministers, including the administrator of EPA and the Minister of Environment in Canada and the Minister of Environment in Mexico, gave the SMOC some priorities that they wanted us to work on. The arena of chemicals management, for those of you who have been in this business for a while, and I think that probably includes most of you in the room, the scope's huge. It's extraordinary. We have extraordinarily large scope of responsibilities, and so I think that the ministers, appropriately so, in their efforts to get some meaningful progress from the SMOC, asked that we focus in a couple of important areas. And you'll be hearing about our progress on those areas over the course of the next 2 days. The first being to establish compatible approaches to identify and track chemicals in commerce. I think later this morning you'll be hearing about some of the great work going on there. To implement some risk reduction strategies. Similarly, we have a fair amount to report in there, and I'm going to talk a bit about what EPA is doing in that space in my presentation this morning. And focusing on environmental monitoring and assessment to support risk reduction strategies, a particularly important aspect of any chemicals management program. So those are the three priority areas that the ministers gave to this working group, and that's where our energies have been focused, and I think you're going to hear a fair amount from the governments on how we've done in those areas, and we look forward to getting your feedback. So some of the highlights that, again, we'll hear in greater detail over the course of the next day and a half. As it relates to identifying and tracking chemicals in progress, you'll be hearing from our Mexican colleagues in particular some of the really great progress they've made in this arena. As it relates to implementing risk reduction strategies, the work group here has analyzed country regulations for specific chemicals, and they are beginning to focus on a couple of chemicals, not a handful, few chemicals that are common priorities across the three governments. They've also done training workshops to improve risk assessment approaches. As anyone who's worked in this space knows, the importance of risk assessment to making meaningful chemical decisions to ensure safety, and how complicated risk assessments can be, and so the importance of sharing along those lines amongst each other. And the Environmental Monitoring Assessment Group has also been involved in training to increase effectiveness in monitoring assessment, and has supported creation of monitoring sites in Mexico. Again, so over the next day or so, you'll be hearing from the work groups who have been moving the ball forward in all three of these areas, these three priorities, the progress that they have made. I'm going to turn my attention now to some of the efforts that we have underway at the U.S. EPA in the space of existing chemicals. The administrator of EPA has made chemical safety one of her top priorities. In the 20-plus years that I've been at the Environmental Protection Agency, this is the first time the leader of our organization has made chemical safety one of their top priorities. And although we support, as an administration, the reform of the Toxic Substances Control Act for a host of reasons, we recognize that we can't just wait for Congress to act. We need to be moving out in a meaningful way using the existing tools that we have to ensure that chemicals are safe in the United States. And so I'll be describing this morning some of the areas of focus that we have brought to that. So as you all well know, the space that we're operating in our business, chemical safety, is a huge space. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about 7,000 chemicals, which is the number I generally focus on, is in the United States. That's the number of chemicals that are ballpark produced at over 25,000 pounds, or you're talking about tens of thousands of chemicals because there's that many chemicals on our chemical inventory in the United States. Regardless of what that number is, it's an extraordinarily large body of work ensuring the safety of that many chemicals. As Barbara said, I spent a good deal of my career in the pesticides program in the United States, where we were able to effectively evaluate the safety of all pesticides sold in the United States, but the entire body of work there was 1,000 chemicals. And it took us over 10 years to do 1,000 chemicals. Here we're talking about a number way beyond that, almost an order of magnitude beyond that. And so what we are proposing to do at the EPA is to take a multi-pronged approach. We're not going to be able to simply go through chemical by chemical and have that be the extent of our program. That's going to be a part of our program, but that's not going to be the extent of our program because we think it'll take too long, frankly, to get through the huge body of work, one chemical at a time, or even classes of chemical at a time. It's going to be a meaningful part of our program. We refer to that as risk assessment and risk management. I'll talk a little bit about what progress we've made and the approach that we're taking there. But that will not be solely how we engage and deploy our efforts. We're also going to be spending a second leg to our three-legged stool in existing chemicals at EPA is going to involve determining ways to effectively collect data for chemicals that do not have meaningful chemical safety databases, as well as screening chemicals for determining which ones we should move into the risk assessment and risk management bin versus those that deserve a lower priority and less attention, at least in the near term. And it's that program area, that leg of the stool, where we're going to be deploying some of the more recent technologies referred to as computational toxicology to help us figure out whether or not we need more information, and if so, what, or whether the chemical is of such low priority that we will, at least for now, not be focusing our energies on the chemical. And the third area, and I think in the short and intermediate term, it's this third area that has the potential for driving risk reduction the best, and that is to figure out how to take the information that we have and make it available to the public in an accessible way. And this is no small feat. We actually have quite a bit of information about chemicals. We have information about chemical toxicity, although it may not always be complete. We have a lot of it. We have a lot of information about chemical use. We have some information about chemical exposure. How we take that information and make it available in a way that you don't need to be a computer scientist or a toxicologist or a full-time chemical specialist to figure out what it may mean for you is one of the big challenges, and one that we are planning on taking head on. So that individuals, companies, nonprofit NGOs, states, anyone who has access to a computer will be able to understand what we understand about a chemical and make informed choices around that chemical. So those are the three legs that we're focusing our energies on, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on each of them. In the risk assessment and risk management, this is as I referred earlier, this is sort of the standard approaches that government have taken to chemicals, is to assess a chemical, and if the risk is higher than the society wants to tolerate, or whatever the statute is that you're operating under, you do something to manage that risk. Again, there are a lot of chemicals, and so just figuring out which ones you want to put your energy into is no small feat. What we chose to do was we developed a methodology using stakeholder input that allowed us to identify those chemicals which we believe are the most important for us to comprehensively evaluate first. So they are chemicals that are known to express certain toxicities, whether it be carcinogenicity or reproductive effects or developmental effects, or they're persistent, they're bioaccumulative and toxic, compounds that historically tend to be problematic in the environment. And they also, we have evidence that there is exposure. So we developed a methodology. We ran several thousand chemicals through the methodology, and we identified the 83 that scored the highest. And those 83 we identified on March the 1st and said we are going to focus our assessment energies into these chemicals. And so these are chemicals that we'll be doing sort of typical risk assessment that those who watch GPA are relatively familiar with. And we identified 7 chemicals that we would be starting with. And each successive year we will take on a number until we get through the 83. This is, I think, of sort of as the more typical standard approach for chemical assessment and risk management. 83, it's not a lot when you're looking at a universe of, let's just say, 7,000, but we do think it's important that we start there. But it can't be, in our view, the only thing that we're doing, as I just don't think that the society is prepared to wait for that long for us to get through 7,000 chemicals. So let's move on to the second leg of our program, which is around data collection and screening. So we still have this rather large universe of chemicals that are not in the 83. Many of them are not particularly well characterized. Some of them we don't have characterized hazard-wise or exposure-wise. And so one of the jobs that we think we had is to figure out how to get them to the point where they're well characterized, where we have a basic understanding of the hazards they may express, as well as the exposures that they may pose. There are a number of tools that are available to us. One is borrowing from our friends across the pond in Europe, data that's been submitted to REACH. And so we'll be working with manufacturers to access data that's been submitted to our colleagues in REACH. There are other tools at our disposal that are more non-traditional, but in my view are going to be, if you're working in this space in 15 years, you better know what you're doing in this expertise, and that's around computational tools. Using non-traditional in vivo testing, non-in vivo testing, whether it be in vitro or computers or genomics or proteomics, to understand the hazard potential of a chemical. And these tools we hope to deploy with the traditional in vivo testing that we've all become so familiar with to help us figure out which chemicals amongst the uncharacterized compounds should be a higher priority and which ones should be a lower priority. And over time, as these tools get more and more sophisticated, we may be able to also use them to determine what in vivo data do you want for the high priority chemicals, and do you even want any in vivo data for the lower priority chemicals. And so we're going to be in this leg of our program, we are going to be doing informed priority setting, where we're going to identify chemicals of higher priority relative to those of lower priority and determine, as the science supports, what data we need for compounds and what data don't we need for certain other compounds. And then we will rely on some traditional tools to get that data and some less traditional tools, but one that we've been encouraged to pursue, which is if this data has been generated for REACH, then the rest of the world regulatorily ought to be accessing it, and we shouldn't ask companies to repeat data. We understand that there are issues with respect to that manufacturers have, contractual issues that they have with the CEFs that they belong to. This is one of the areas where I say you can't have your cake and eat it too. It's something we say in the United States. You can't tell me, don't make me repeat the data, and then turn around and tell me you can't give me the data. So either you give me the data because you've already done it and you figure out how to work something out with your CEF, or you'll have to repeat the data. But you can't have it both ways. So I'm confident, though, that working together we'll figure out how, because I don't think anybody has an interest in repeating all of this data that's been generated, how that data can be used to support regulatory decisions if it's necessary in North America. So that's the second leg of our stool. And the third one, as I mentioned, is public access to chemical data and information. So there you are, you're the American public, you see us working on 83 chemicals that we're going to do assessments on. That's important to you. That means that either we're going to say something is safe or it's not safe, and we'll take action to remove the part that's not safe. Okay, I feel good about that. This middle leg, EPA is working on figuring out what data they need to determine whether something is safe or not. I'm a member of the public, whether it's I own a small company that uses chemicals to sell a product, or I'm a housewife or a house husband trying to make choices about what products I want used in my house. That second leg doesn't do too much for me in the short term or even in the intermediate term. But this piece here does. Allowing people access, not just access, but making it accessible so that they can make an informed choice about a compound is the third leg. And over the course of the next several months, we'll be having some stakeholder sessions to get some feedback from stakeholders, whether you are a basic manufacturer, you're an intermediate, you're buying chemicals from somebody to put it in a product, or you're a state, or you're an NGO, or you're a housewife or house husband, you're the lawn and garden guy, whatever it is that stakeholder in this space, we're going to ask for your advice about how we can take all of this data that we've got and make it available in a way that you could find usable. So that you can feel like you're making an informed choice, whether you're a company that buys chemicals, a company that sells chemicals, a company that, or an individual that uses chemicals. So this will be I've articulated on this page a number of the things that we've already done, but we're going to basically try to pull it all together and say, how can we make this information available to you that is usable to you? Now, there are issues around CBI that are confidential business information that we're not going to violate to provide information available, but there's lots of information that we have that is not trade secret or protected. So this part of our program, I think, will be very meaningful to the public in the short and intermediate term, while we do the work of government to evaluate chemical safety, which takes longer, or to determine whether or not a chemical has data gaps that we need to fill, which also will take longer. This, although there are IT issues around it, information technology, we think that we can get our arms around those in relatively short order so that we can make information available that's useful. And that, I think, if I'm a member of the public, will be very meaningful to me in a relatively short period of time. Another part of our efforts to make information available involves our work in the arena of green chemistry and green engineering. A lot of tremendous work has occurred in the private sector and in the governmental sector and the NGO sector around green chemistry and green engineering, and how we figure out how to harness that in a way that increases the adoption of these technologies is an area that we spend a fair amount of time and energy on. It's very exciting. Whenever I'm with a company, a chemical company, whether they're at the basic manufacturer or they're buying chemicals, this is the part of the space that they get most excited about. It's the part of the space that I get most excited about. And so how we create an environment that encourages this and gives credit for it to help move chemical safety is a big part of how we use information, because it's about information, how you use that information. Another very specific piece of that is a program we have in the United States called Design for the Environment, where we evaluate products, chemical products that consumers buy for hazard. And if we're able to make a judgment that the inherent hazard of all the ingredients in the product are low, we will allow the manufacturer to use a Design for the Environment label on it. We currently have 2,700 products, mostly cleaning products, but not exclusively, that are labeled as such. This is another example of having information, pushing information out in a way that's accessible. I'm somebody buying a product off of a shelf. I'm a little busy. I can't go and research all the ingredients. But if I can just look at it and see a Design for the Environment label, I can have confidence that I'm buying something that is made of ingredients that are of low hazard. Again, a creative way of helping information inform in this case, consumers. And so this is clearly going to be one of the big pieces of our efforts to push information out. So those are the three broad areas that comprise the existing chemicals program at EPA. It is my most important priority for however long I'm given the opportunity to be assistant administrator in this capacity, as I think that having a sustainable, meaning that it carries on when I'm not here or others are not here to carry it on, existing chemicals program is the most important thing for our organization. Bringing it back to this group, this is the job that we have, whether or not you are with a government or with a chemical company, or you are with an academic institution, or you're an NGO, that we have a job that I think we all share, which is safe chemicals in North America. It's an extraordinarily large job that we have. And that's why we have a forum like this, because I don't think any one of us can do it by ourselves. And so what we're attempting to do in a forum like this is gather together a number of entities, government and non-government, to share about how we are collectively and individually trying to do that job to ensure safe chemicals. I think that you'll hear over the next day and a half some meaningful progress on the priority areas that have been identified for the SMOC by the ministers. And our understanding of chemicals and commerce, which you'll hear about in particular from our colleagues in Mexico, knowing what is in the inventory is vitally important. It's vitally important to almost any next step you're going to do. Monitoring chemicals, knowing where you need to focus your energies is really important. If there's no exposure, you don't need to necessarily spend as much time on something. So knowing where there's exposure through monitoring is a critical element to a successful and comprehensive chemicals management strategy. And then having risk reduction strategies in place for where you've identified a risk is also critical to any comprehensive program. And what you'll be hearing today and over the next day and a half are the progress that the SMOC has made in those three areas. So I want to thank you all once again for all of the time and the energy that you've put into, from whatever your position in the stakeholder community, government, NGO, industry, academia, whatever it is that you have brought to the table. I thank you for your participation. As I said, this is a job that's too big for any one of us individually or institutionally, so it's going to take all of us putting the best minds together to achieve I think our common and collective mission of safe chemicals. Thank you.